You are listening to KZSC's Voces, Críticas, Critical Voices. I am your producer and host, Silvana Falcon. Today I am here with Reyna Grande, an award-winning author and the recipient of the 2015 Luis Leal Award for Distinction in Chicano-Latino Literature. Her first novel, Across 100 Mountains, received the 2006 El Premio Aztlán Award and a 2007 American Book Award. Her second novel, Dancing with Butterflies, was the recipient of a 2010 International Latino Book Award. She was also a 2003 Penn Center USA Emerging Voices Fellow. I've invited her to talk about her new book, A Dream Called Home, which is a follow-up memoir to The Distance Between Us. The Distance Between Us was the first memoir focusing on life before and after migrating from Mexico to the United States, and this new memoir tells the story of her pursuit to become the first in her family to earn a college degree and to find her place in her new adoptive country. The book will be available in October 2018. Welcome, Reyna, to KZSC's Voces Críticas.
Thank you.
So when you began writing another memoir, how did you go about recollecting and piecing together the memories of your life? And was this process of memory recollection similar to your first memoir?
Well, when I wrote The Distance Between Us, I started with what I remembered. Sometimes when I didn't remember what happened, I remember how it felt. So I started with the feeling first, and then from there, I began to recreate the memory. After I ran out of the things that I remembered or felt, I started to interview my siblings, especially my older sister, because she was really left with all the responsibility. She remembered a whole lot too, so she helped me to fill in my memory gaps. And after I interviewed my brother, mostly it was because in the book he was coming across as a very undeveloped character because my memories did not really include my brother much. It was mostly me and my sister. And when I interviewed him, he gave me a really good insight into what a boy remembers, which is different from what a girl remembers, to my surprise. And I added his memories to the book. So that's how I managed to write The Distance Between Us. And then when I wrote A Dream Called Home, I began with the same way again. I started with what I remembered, and then I interviewed my sister, Mago, and my sister Betty, since she plays a big part in the book too. And then I also talked to my professors that I write about in the book, my boss. So pretty much most of the people that are in the book I talked to, and I picked their brains.
Did it surprise you what you remembered about this particular time?
Not too surprised. I actually had an easier time writing this memoir than the first one because the first one started when I was 4 years old. And I had to really, really struggle to remember those early memories and piece together my childhood. That was really hard for me. Whereas with this book, I'm writing about my 20s and I'm 42 years old now, but it really felt like it was just yesterday. So it wasn't such a struggle for me to remember because I learned so much from writing The Distance Between Us. With this book, I knew what the structure was. I knew what the theme was from the very beginning. And all I needed to do was really select those memories to write about that fit my theme. I actually wrote this book, I'm going to say, in about 6 months, whereas The Distance Between Us took me about 4 years to put together because I just didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't a memoirist, I was a novelist. The other thing, too, with this book, with A Dream Called Home, is that I have spent the last 6 years talking about myself and my family because of the success of The Distance Between Us. So in a way, I feel that this past 6 years, I've been writing the book. Orally, I have been writing the book.
And you just hit on something, how different memoir writing is to the fiction writing you've done. So could you talk a little bit about why that called on a different kind of talent or a different kind of skill set that you were nurturing in the process of writing these two memoirs?
I always wrote about myself and my feelings, but mostly it was journal writing. But when it came time to creative writing, I always turned to fiction. I didn't write about myself, but I wrote autobiographical fiction. So I took an experience that I had and I would start from there and turn it into a story, use my imagination to create characters and create other circumstances that weren't just mine. And I really liked that because it allowed me to still explore my feelings and put them in a story without me being the protagonist of that story. And it was more out of trying to protect myself because I felt very vulnerable. I was really struggling in my life to just stay afloat and survive. And my writing was very therapeutic, but I just didn't want to be the protagonist of those stories. So I love fiction because of that. It allowed me to still explore my truth without being so vulnerable, without having to completely expose myself. And also I love to write fiction because it also allowed me to create new things, new scenarios or characters. Like when I wrote my first novel, started writing it here, it was my senior project, but originally it was going to be a memoir. It was going to be very autobiographical. When I first started the story, it was about me and my brother and my sister being left behind in Mexico. And then pretty soon I realized I can't write this story. So I ended up getting rid of two of the characters and I just kept one, the girl. And also the father became a completely different father. It was the father that I fantasized about. So he's like a really nice guy, really, really wonderful dad who loves his daughter. And there's such a beautiful father-daughter relationship that I didn't have in my life, but it allowed me to experience it through fiction because I created that relationship that I wish I had had with my dad. It also allowed me to explore my fear. I have this question even today, what would have happened to me if my dad had never come back for me? What would my life have been like? So then that novel became an exploration of that question. What would my life have been like? And it felt very liberating to be able to not be just stuck to writing my truth, but actually to recreate some alternate reality of what might have been. It just became something really wonderful to write about. And then I wrote, after Across 100 Mountains, I wrote another novel that was still autobiographical. I pulled a lot from my own experiences. And when I finished that novel, that was when I felt I was ready to write a memoir. I felt confident as a writer. Like I felt that I knew how to write a book. I knew how to finish the book, which is more important. In terms of craft, I feel really confident about what I'm doing.
I think that question you posed, what would have happened if my father had never returned, is a similar question that those of us like myself who are the children of immigrants who are U.S. born, what if my parents had never left, in this case, Peru? What would my life have become? And so this what if question seems to cross the imagination of both the immigrant child as well as the child of immigrants.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing about immigrating is that you live a new life, you have new experiences, but you're always thinking about the life you left behind. And then I feel that sometimes you end up living in these two parallel universes where you're living the reality, but then you're also imagining the other you and what would the other you be doing back home. I had a very traumatic experience recently with the translation of A Dream Called Home, because I had done my own translation for The Distance Between Us and Across 100 Mountains. I've been here since I was 9 years old, so my Spanish is not that great. I only went up to the 3rd grade in Mexico, but I still wanted to do my own translation, even though my Spanish is not perfect. But with A Dream Called Home, my editor and my agent felt that it was better that they hire a professional translator. And because I was so insecure about my skills in Spanish, I said, fine. And when I received the translation, it was so shocking to me to read my own work in my native tongue, and I couldn't understand it. Like the translator had used some really fancy Spanish, and I had to pick up the dictionary to look up words that I didn't know in my own mother tongue. And I started to create this fantasy of the Reyna that had never come to the U.S., the Reyna that stayed in Mexico, that went to college in Mexico. And I felt like that is how that other Reyna might have talked. Those are the words she might have learned and been able to use. And so I started to imagine this other me, the Mexican me that stayed there, and what she would be like. And it was really interesting experience of me, the Reyna that writes in English, and then the other Reyna that might have written in Spanish and known how to use these fancy words. It also shook me up my confidence in who I am in terms of my Mexican identity, because I feel like if I don't know these Spanish words, then how dare I say that Spanish is my mother tongue? And I'm still trying to figure out how can I overcome the feeling of insecurity that translation brought out in me.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's such an important point because sometimes in translations, there's a whole duality that language plays in our lives, and imagining who you would have become had you written this book or your prior books in Spanish first and then had the English translation, what kind of changes would have happened there. So let's talk about your arrival to UC Santa Cruz as a transfer student all the way from Los Angeles, which in some ways, as someone who also lived in Los Angeles, this is night and day in terms of our lives. And you're part of Kresge College at the time. And you come to campus and you take the picture that thousands of students take when they get to this campus, which is the picture in front of the sign of UC Santa Cruz at the entrance. What would the Reyna of today, the 2018 Reyna, tell that young transfer student who was taking that picture about what her life would be like?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell her to hold on tight because it's going to be a very bumpy ride, but it's going to be wonderful. And she's going to arrive at a really, really great place in her life where she's going to turn out to be the woman that she should be.
That she was meant to be.
Yeah.
So in addition to, obviously, to the culture shock, you have a lot of family stuff that you write about in your book, particularly with regards to your sister. And I think what your memoir really shows quite effectively is that Latino students and immigrant kids typically don't come to college as just individuals. We often arrive to these campuses with sometimes complicated family lives. And I wondered if you, as a first-generation student on this campus, felt you could disclose those challenges to your professors, or did you disclose those challenges to your professors about what you were dealing with in terms of your family, or did you kind of keep that stuff to yourself?
I kept it to myself. I think I was embarrassed. I was really embarrassed to go talk to people about what was going on in my family. Of course, when I was at community college, I opened up to a professor there, and it turned out to be a really good thing because when I needed help, she was there for me. And if I had never told her what was going on at home, she would not have known that I needed help. But then when I got here, because I didn't really know the professors once I arrived, I didn't feel that I could go tell them about my problems. And the thing with my sister, my younger sister, happened not too long after I had arrived here. So I hadn't really formed any good relationships with my professors at that point to go and say, hey, guess what? I have to bring my sister to live with me and I don't know what to do. So I had to deal with it on my own. And I snuck my sister in to live here on campus in my dorm. And then I was asked to leave once the campus housing office found out that I had my sister with me. Well, they gave me a choice. They said either get rid of your sister or move out.
That's kind of an impossible choice, right? And you convey that in the memoir.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really tough choice. And I think instead of saying either get rid of your sister or move out, they should have said, what's going on? Do you need help? Why is your sister living with you? What can we do? Do you need someone to talk to? I wish that had been the way to handle, because students, a lot of times we have responsibilities to our family, especially to our siblings when things are not very stable at home. And they put me in a place that was really hard for me. It's like they're telling me to get rid of my sister or to move out of campus. And I had to give up my student apartment here and find housing off campus. And it was expensive. And I was just dealing with a lot at the time. And yeah, I wish they had asked me what was going on.
You're listening to award-winning author Reyna Grande. We're discussing her latest book, a memoir called A Dream Called Home. A Dream Called Home tells the story of Reyna's pursuit to become the first in her family to earn a college degree at UC Santa Cruz and to find her place in her new adoptive country. There were a handful of mentors, actually, and teachers who supported you and who really made a difference in your life. And Diana was one of the mentors from Pasadena City College who played such an important role in your life. And I wondered if you could talk about why we need more mentors like Diana and how specifically, had these mentors not come into your life, from Diana to the mentors you had here at UC Santa Cruz, how that would have really changed the course of your life.
When I met Diana, she was my English professor at the community college. I was really struggling at home because my father was an alcoholic and he was very, very abusive. And both of my older siblings had dropped out of college by that point and they had left the house because they couldn't take it anymore. So I was by myself. And when my father was arrested for spousal abuse, I went to tell Diana about what happened. And she said, why don't you come live with me? And she took me to live with her because she didn't want me to drop out of college because of all these problems. For me, that's like going above and beyond the job description, right? As a teacher. But she completely changed my life by doing that. She took me in, she gave me a safe and stable home, and she encouraged me to stay in college and to continue to work towards my dreams and not let my family problems get in the way. She was the one that encouraged me to come to UCSC. So she was there for me and she kept me on the path instead of me losing my way. And I know sometimes, people ask me why did you do it and how come your brother and your sister dropped out of college and you stayed and you succeeded in graduating? And I say, well, because I had a mentor and they didn't. And I know that if I hadn't had this mentor, who knows where I would have ended up. So when I got here, it took me a while, but I started to find my mentors here too. And, I was very fortunate that I signed up for Chicano literature class with Marta Navarro. And she became my mentor. And she was a really wonderful mentor and big fan of my work, which I needed at the time because when I was taking creative writing classes here, my teachers were not that supportive. They were very critical of my work. And I really felt, especially most of the time I was the only Latina in my writing classes, I felt that nobody was understanding my stories, that they were questioning my truth, that I was writing about. And when I told Marta about what I was feeling in my writing classes, she said, why don't you let me read your stories? And one of the best things she said was after she finished reading, she said, your work reminds me of Juan Rulfo. And I had never heard of Juan Rulfo, and then she hands me his books and I read them. And of course, I was flattered. That was enough to encourage me to keep writing. So I owe a lot to Marta in that she made sure that I had acquired that confidence in my writing to keep going and not give up. And during the 3 years that I was here, she read everything I wrote and she was always giving me new books to write and new writers to learn from. So that's what she did. And I really loved that and appreciated that. Then I was very fortunate when in my second year here, Mika Perks was hired as a creative writing teacher. And she was the first one I felt in the writing program that really understood what I was writing about. She never criticized what I wrote. And she focused a lot on my craft, on making sure that I became a better writer. But she never once criticized me for what I was writing. And she never made me feel that my experiences as a Mexican immigrant did not mean anything. So that's why to this day, I'm still close to Mika because of that. And she still reads all my work. She read A Dream Called Home and gave me her feedback. She read The Distance Between Us before that. She read Dancing with Butterflies before that. And Across 100 Mountains. She's read every single book I've written and given me feedback, even though she was my teacher 20 years ago. But she's still there for me. So these are the two mentors that were very impactful and that made my 3 years here at Santa Cruz a much, much better experience.
It's very clear to me that writing has a power, right? That there is a real inherent power to the writing when you care for it, nurture it, and treat it like the craft that it is. Did you always know you wanted to be a writer? Because it seems like you came into Santa Cruz already knowing you wanted to be a writer. So had that always been one of your goals?
Well, I guess that's where Diana comes in, because before I met Diana at the community college, I liked to write, but I never saw myself as a writer because I did not grow up reading any books written by people like me. I didn't have any exposure to Latino literature, and I grew up reading books like Sweet Valley High.
I read those too.
Oh, yeah. Well, they've come in handy now in terms of me understanding my children.
That's so funny.
I think I should reread them. Anyway, so when I arrived at the community college, I liked to write, but I didn't think of myself as a writer. And when I met Diana, one of the first books she gave me was The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And that opened up the world to me in terms of seeing myself in a book and also seeing the name of a Latina writer on a book cover. And she gave me books by Isabel Allende and Laura Esquivel and Julia Alvarez. And then she would say, if Sandra Cisneros can do it, you can do it. So she was the one that exposed me to all this literature that I had never even heard of. And because of that, I realized that there might be a future for me in writing, that it might be a possibility to pursue a career in writing. So that was the turning point in terms of me writing for myself. And now I was actually writing towards something, a possible career in writing. So when she sent me here to UCSC, it was to pursue a creative writing degree. And she said that I needed to come here because this was a really wonderful place for students who were into the arts. And she felt that the university was small enough where I wouldn't get so lost versus going to UCLA, where I had also been accepted to. So she sent me off here. And it was really wonderful because, you know, after my first difficult experiences of when I arrived, after that, you know, once I met Marta and I met Mika, I did manage to focus more on my writing and to really hone my craft and become more confident in terms of being a storyteller and all of those things. So I guess that's when things changed for me.
I want to thank you so much for taking time and coming on the show today. I am so honored to have been able to read an early copy of the book to prepare for the interview today. I was just so taken with the vulnerability and the openness that was just so apparent in the text. There's so much of it that I really related to. And I think you're probably going to be saving lives. And I'm not even kidding, you know, by being that truthful and that honest with your struggles, I think is going to be really impactful for students. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.